I never told my son about my garage invention. When he broke in with his girlfriend, I saw everything. The moment I heard the side door of my garage splinter open at 2 in the morning, I didn't reach for my phone to call the police. I reached for the switch on the wall beside my workbench. The one I'd never shown another living soul, and I turned everything off. Every light, every hum, every trace of what I'd spent 11 years building in secret. By the time my son's footsteps crossed the threshold, my garage was nothing but darkness and the smell of machine oil and old wood. But it was too late. He'd already seen the glow. My name is Daniel Hartwell, and I am 63 years old, and I have kept a secret from my family for longer than my youngest child has been alive. I've kept it through my wife Margaret's death in 2019, through 2 recessions, through a pandemic that locked me inside this house for 14 months and gave me more hours in that garage than I'd ever dreamed of having. I've kept it through my son Marcus's college graduation, his first job, his first heartbreak, his second heartbreak, and the arrival of this new girl, Priya, who I'd met exactly twice at Sunday dinners, where she smiled politely and asked careful questions and watched me the way people watch someone they're trying to figure out. I've kept it, in other words, through everything that matters. And now Marcus had broken my garage door open with what I would later discover was a flathead screwdriver jammed into the old latch I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years, and all my keeping was finished. Let me tell you how it started. Not tonight. Tonight will take care of itself. I mean the original start, the beginning of the thing in the garage that I never named, never published, never patented, never whispered to another person on this earth. It started with a bird. Margaret and I had been married for 22 years when I found the starling in the backyard. This was late October of 2009. Marcus was 14 and convinced the world owed him an apology for existing, and our daughter Claire was 19 and away at her first year of university, calling home every Sunday with a different crisis. I was a mechanical engineer at Lowell Dynamics, which is a company that makes precision components for aerospace guidance systems, which is a way of saying that I spent my days solving problems that other people defined, and then going home to a dinner I didn't cook and a television show I didn't choose and a bed I was grateful for but rarely excited by. I was not an unhappy man. I want to be clear about that. I was a man in the middle of a life that fit him the way a good coat fits, not glamorous, not exciting, but warm and reliable and cut to his particular shape. Margaret was funny in ways that still surprised me after 2 decades. Marcus was difficult in ways that I recognized because I had been difficult in exactly the same ways at exactly the same age. Claire was brilliant, and I was proud of her in a way that sometimes felt too large for my chest. But I was also bored, not in a dangerous way, just in the quiet, persistent way of a man who has solved all the problems in his immediate vicinity and doesn't know what to do with his hands. Then I found the starling. It was sitting at the edge of the garden, near the stone wall where Margaret grew her climbing roses. It wasn't injured, I checked. It wasn't sick as far as I could tell. It was just sitting very still, its small black eye tracking me as I crouched beside it, its feathers iridescent in the thin October sunlight, doing something I can only describe as thinking. I know how that sounds. I'm an engineer. I don't typically describe birds as thinking. I describe them as exhibiting behaviors consistent with threat assessment or resource evaluation. But this bird, this particular small bird on this particular gray afternoon, was doing something that registered in some pre-professional part of my brain as deliberate, as intentional, as aware. I watched it for 20 minutes. It watched me back. Then it flew away, and I went inside, and I couldn't sleep that night, and by 4 in the morning I was in the garage at my workbench with a yellow legal pad, and I was drawing something I didn't have a name for yet. What I built over the next 11 years was a machine. I know that's an absurdly reductive thing to say. A toaster is a machine, a stapler is a machine. What I built was something for which the word machine is technically accurate and practically useless, the way calling the ocean wet is technically accurate and practically useless. I'll try to explain it properly. My work at Lowell Dynamics involved something called resonance mapping, essentially the process of identifying the precise vibrational frequencies at which different materials respond, and then engineering components that either dampen those frequencies or amplify them. Depending on what you need, it's painstaking work. It's also in the way of all genuinely painstaking work, occasionally beautiful. There are moments when you get a resonance map exactly right, when you see on your oscilloscope a waveform so clean and so perfectly periodic that it looks less like data and more like music. I had always been interested in the resonance properties of biological systems, not in any formal research sense, just as a personal curiosity, the kind of thing you read about on Sunday afternoons when you finished the newspaper. I knew that the human heart has a resonant frequency. I knew that bone has a resonant frequency. I knew that individual cells have resonant frequencies, and that these frequencies change depending on what's happening inside the cell, whether it's under stress, whether it's healthy, whether it's doing something unusual. The question I started asking myself in 2009, crouched over that yellow legal pad at 4 in the morning, was this: if everything living has a resonant frequency, and if those frequencies change in response to internal states, then could you build a device sensitive enough to read those frequencies from a distance? Not heart rate, not temperature, not brainwave activity in the crude sense that an EEG measures it. Something finer than that. Something that could read in the resonance patterns of a living body what that body was experiencing, what that body was, for lack of a better word, feeling. I told myself I was just tinkering. I told myself it was a hobby, a way to use my hands on something that was mine rather than Lowell Dynamics. I told Margaret I was working on a side project, and she nodded and brought me coffee and didn't ask questions, because she had always understood that I needed a room of my own inside my head, and the garage was the physical version of that room. By 2013, I had something that could detect gross emotional states in laboratory mice at a range of about 2 feet. By 2016, I had refined it to the point where I could reliably distinguish between fear, comfort, and what I was calling exploratory arousal, the particular resonance pattern that animals exhibit when they encounter something new and interesting, and not yet threatening. By 2018, I had pushed the range to 30 feet and expanded the subject range to humans. I tested it on myself first. For months, I sat in my garage in various emotional states, watching videos that made me sad, videos that made me laugh, videos of my daughter's wedding that made me feel something I don't have a single word for, and I calibrated the machine against my own physiological record until I was confident it was reading what I thought it was reading. Then Margaret got sick. She was diagnosed in February of 2018, pancreatic cancer stage 3. She was 60 years old, and she had just started a garden club, and she was learning to paint watercolors, and she had told me the previous New Year's Eve that she thought the coming year was going to be a good one. She said she had a feeling the machine became something different after the diagnosis. I don't know how to explain what happens to a project when the context of your life shifts catastrophically around it. The machine had been an intellectual exercise, a hobby, a private satisfaction. After Margaret's diagnosis, it became something I worked on with a ferocity that frightened me a little. I was in the garage every spare hour. I was miniaturizing components, extending the range, refining the sensitivity of the resonance filters until the machine could distinguish not just between broad emotional categories, but between what felt like specific textures of experience. I told myself I was processing grief by working. That was partially true. But I was also trying to build something I could use on Margaret. I wanted to know with precision how she was feeling, not what she told me. Margaret was constitutionally opposed to worrying the people she loved, which meant that when I asked how she was feeling, she always gave me the warmest, most reassuring version of the truth, sanded down to protect me. I wanted the unedited version. I wanted to know when she was frightened. I wanted to know when the pain was worse than she was admitting. I wanted to know, and this is the part I've never said aloud before when she was at peace. I used the machine on her 17 times in the last 8 months of her life. I never told her. I'm not sure even now whether that was a violation or an act of love. Probably both, probably it. Doesn't matter because what I found, reading her resonance patterns as she sat in the garden. In the late afternoon light as she slept beside me, as she held Marcus's hand at the kitchen table and told him she wasn't scared, what I found was that she was telling the truth. She wasn't scared, her resonance was something I had never seen in any of my readings. It was lower than her baseline by about 12 hertz, slower, steadier, with an almost musical periodicity that I eventually labeled acceptance, but which felt when I looked at it on the screen like something with more dignity than that word carries. She was not scared, she was sorrowful, she was tired, and underneath that, running through everything like a frequency that couldn't be dampened, she was something that the machine's readout could only approximate, could only gesture toward, but which I understood immediately. She was grateful. For what exactly I could only guess, but the reading was unmistakable. She died in March of 2019 in the morning, with the spring light coming through the bedroom window, and she was at peace in a way that I am able to say with technical certainty was not performance and not denial. The machine told me. I don't know if that makes any of this better or worse, but I know it's true. After Margaret died, I didn't go into the garage for 4 months. When I went back in, I wasn't sure why. I told myself it was to dismantle the machine, to take apart the 11 years of components and store them in boxes or throw them away, to reclaim the garage for some more practical purpose. Instead, I turned the machine on. I sat down in my old chair, the one with the cracked leather armrest, and I let it read me. It read me for 3 hours. I didn't look at the output until the next day. When I did, I stared at it for a long time. The resonance pattern was unlike anything in my library. It was fragmented in a way that living patterns usually aren't. The normal rhythms of biological resonance are fundamentally coherent even under stress, because living systems are organized systems and organization produces coherence. My pattern that night was broken at every level. The frequencies didn't build on each other, they interfered with each other, canceled each other out, produced the acoustic equivalent of static. The machine had no label for it, I did. It was the shape of a man who didn't know how to live in a world where his wife was gone. I closed the garage for another 2 months. Then I came back and kept working. By the summer of 2023, I had built something that I can only describe as complete, not finished. I'm not sure it will ever be finished in the way that an engineering project is finished, handed off, deployed, but complete in the sense that it had become the thing it was going to be. The core device was roughly the size and shape of a small refrigerator, housed in brushed aluminum. That I'd machined myself with a display panel on the front and a parabolic resonance collector on the top that I'd designed to look, if anyone glanced at it casually, like an unusually complicated stereo speaker. Around it, at various points in the garage, I had positioned 11 secondary collectors no bigger than smoke detectors, which together created a resonance field, covering the entire space and extending, depending on atmospheric conditions, between 60 and 90 feet beyond the walls. What the machine could do by that point was this: it could read the emotional resonance signature of any living person within its field with an accuracy I estimated at around 83%, meaning that 83% of the emotional states I identified by machine were later confirmed by the subject when I could compare them against reported experience or behavioral record. But I want to be very clear about what emotional resonance signature means and what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean I could read minds. I couldn't tell you what someone was thinking. I couldn't access memory or intention or plan. I couldn't tell you whether the person was thinking about their childhood or their grocery list or their mortgage. What I could tell you was how they were feeling right now, in this moment, beneath whatever face they were presenting to the world. That is a different thing from mind reading. It is, I would argue, something more intimate. Because the face we present to the world is our own, it belongs to us, the way we feel raw. Underneath, before we've decided how to manage it and package it and offer it to other people. That is something else, something private, something that even the person feeling it is often only partially aware of. I had built a device that could see that private thing. And I had told no one. Why hadn't I told anyone? I've asked myself this question many times, particularly in the 4 years since the machine reached what I'm calling completion. The obvious answer, the answer I gave myself for years, is that I wasn't ready. The technology was unproven at scale. I hadn't published. I hadn't peer-reviewed. I hadn't even properly documented my methodology in any form that a third party could evaluate. Releasing something like this into the world without proper validation would be irresponsible. That's the obvious answer, and it's not wrong, but it's also not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I was afraid. Not of the world's reaction to the technology, though that fear was there too in the background, the reasonable fear of any engineer who understands that the same tool that can bring comfort can also bring catastrophe, not of ridicule, though a 60-year-old mechanical engineer claiming to have built an emotional resonance reader in his garage would invite considerable ridicule from the scientific community. I was afraid that if I told anyone, I would have to stop using it the way I'd been using it. Because here's what I hadn't told anyone, the thing behind the thing: I had been using the machine to read the people in my life for years, not systematically, not with any malicious intent. Just every now and then, when someone I loved was standing in my driveway talking to me. When someone sat at my kitchen table for Sunday dinner, I would make a quiet excuse to step into the garage, and I would look at the display, and I would know how they were really feeling. I did it with my daughter Claire when she visited from Portland and told me she was fine. Everything was fine, the marriage was great, she was great, and the machine told me she was frightened about something she wasn't ready to talk about yet. 3 months later she called to tell me she and her husband were separating. I wasn't surprised. I knew how to be ready for her. I did it with my neighbor Frank, who came over one evening in the way that people come over when they have something to say but can't figure out how to start. The machine read him before I even opened the door, and I knew he was carrying something heavy, something that had shame attached to it, and so when he sat down at my kitchen table and started making small talk, I cut through it gently and told him that whatever was on his mind, I had time, and he cried for 10 minutes before he told me that his wife had asked for a divorce. I did it, I'm not proud to say, at a neighborhood block party in the summer of 2022, letting the machine extend its range out through my open garage door while people gathered in the street. And I moved through the crowd, having ordinary conversations but knowing who was happy and who was in pain and who was pretending. That was the moment I knew the machine had become something I needed to think more carefully about. And then the election season started, and I closed the garage and didn't go back for 3 weeks. Marcus showed up at the house unannounced on a Wednesday evening in early September of this year. He didn't call ahead. He just appeared at my door with Priya, both of them in the particular state of combined exhilaration and terror that I recognized from parenting, from memory, as the aftermath of a very significant decision. I made pasta, we ate at the kitchen table. Marcus talked about his work and I talked about mine. And Priya ate carefully and watched me the way she always watched me, with those precise, evaluating eyes. She was getting her PhD in cognitive neuroscience. We had not yet had a real conversation. The two of us had not yet fully occupied the same room, if you know what I mean. We'd been circling each other at a polite distance. After dinner, Marcus leaned back in his chair and said, "Dad, Priya and I are engaged." I said, "Congratulations." I meant it. Marcus looked happy in a way that he hadn't looked since before his mother got sick, a loose, easy happiness that sat naturally on him rather than being arranged there. Priya was watching me over her wine glass, and there was something in her expression I couldn't fully read, not the machine read, just the ordinary human reading we do with our eyes and our history and our instinct. After they left, I went into the garage and I sat down and I thought about the fact that I had not turned the machine on all evening. That felt significant. I wasn't sure how. The night Marcus broke in was 3 weeks after the engagement dinner. I was asleep or nearly asleep, that particular thin sleep of old men that is less like rest and more like a brief halt in the business of being awake. I heard the garage side door. I knew immediately that it wasn't a branch or an animal or the contracting of wood in the October cold. It was a screwdriver in a latch and then a door swinging open and then footsteps. I moved faster than a 63-year-old man has any right to move. I was down the stairs and through the kitchen and at the garage door, the interior one that leads from the kitchen. Less than 45 seconds, I did not turn on the garage light. I turned off the machine and then I opened the interior door and stepped into the dark garage and said, in a voice that I was pleased to note was level and calm, "Marcus." A flashlight beam swung toward me and I blinked against it. "Dad," his voice was strange, not guilty or not only guilty, there was something else in it. "I'm sorry, we needed to see. Turn the flashlight down." He did. I reached for the wall switch and turned on the overhead work light, which cast everything in that flat, honest fluorescence that is terrible for comfort and excellent for seeing things clearly. Marcus and Priya were standing in the center of my garage, 3 feet from the main unit. Priya had her phone out, not pointing it at anything, just holding it, which seemed like a gesture of restraint on her part, like she'd been about to take a picture and thought better of it. Marcus looked like a teenager who'd been caught, that particular combination of defiance and self-awareness that is worse than pure defiance because it knows exactly what it is. They were both looking at the machine. Priya was the one who spoke first. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, and her voice was careful the way a doctor's voice is careful. "They're about to tell you something important and want to get the words exactly right. I have to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm not asking to be intrusive. I'm asking because I think I understand what this is." I looked at her. "How long," she said, "have you been working on biological resonance detection?" The garage was very quiet. 11 years, I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was something in her face that I can only describe as recognition, the particular expression of a person who has just confirmed something they suspected but hardly dared believe. "The secondary collectors," she said, "the ones mounted at intervals around the room, they're not for amplification, are they? They're for triangulation. You're building a 3-dimensional resonance field, not just a directional beam." "Yes," I said. Marcus was looking between us with the expression of a man watching a conversation in a language he almost speaks. "What is this?" he said. "Dad, what is she talking about? What is this thing?" "Priya," I said, ignoring Marcus for the moment, because Priya was the engine of whatever was happening and Marcus was along for the ride. "How do you know about biological resonance detection?" She took a breath. "Because," she said, "my dissertation is on the theoretical framework for exactly what you appear to have built, effective resonance mapping, reading emotional states through the resonance properties of biological tissues." She paused. "I've been working on the theory for 3 years. I estimated we were maybe 15 to 20 years from a working prototype." She looked at the machine again. "You've been working on this for 11 years and you're sitting in your garage and nobody knows." The fluorescent light buzzed. "Nobody knew," I said. Marcus put his hands on top of his head, which is a thing he has done since he was 7. When he's trying to understand something that exceeds his current model of the world. "Dad," he said. "Dad, how? You're a mechanical engineer. You make parts for planes." "I make parts for guidance systems," I said. "Guidance systems use resonance mapping. Principles are the same, the application is different." "The application," Priya said slowly, "could change. This could change." She stopped herself. She was, I realized, trying not to say something too large in too small a space. "Sit down," I said. "Both of you. There are 2 old wooden chairs in my garage and a stool that I've had since 1997. Marcus took a chair. Priya took the stool and pulled it close to the machine and looked at it with an attention that I recognized because I have felt it myself. the particular quality of attention that is not quite looking and not quite thinking, but something between them, the thing you do when you're in the presence of something that might change things. I sat in the other chair. And then, for the first time in 11 years, I started to explain. I talked for 2 hours. I told them everything: the starling, the yellow legal pad, the resonance maps of laboratory mice, the years of refinement, the moment in 2016 when I first successfully read a human subject, which was myself, which was the most unsettling experience of my professional life. Seeing the architecture of your own emotional state displayed in frequency curves on a screen. I didn't tell them about Margaret, not that night. That part of the story is mine and I'll decide when and whether to share it. But I told them everything else. Priya asked questions that demonstrated a theoretical grasp of the technology that was, frankly, more sophisticated than my own in several respects. She had the mathematical vocabulary I had always lacked. My engineering was intuitive, built up from experiment and observation, while she had been approaching the same problem from the theoretical side and had formal frameworks for things I had only described in my own improvised language. Listening to her talk about the work was like hearing music you composed played by someone who could actually read the notation. Marcus was quieter. He sat in his chair with his elbows on his knees and listened to his father explain an 11-year secret, and the expression on his face moved through several things I could name and several I couldn't. At one point he said, "Why didn't you tell us? After Mom died, why didn't you tell us any of this?" I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "Because I was using it," I said, "and I was afraid that if I told you I'd have to stop." "Using it how?" I looked at him. "To know how you were really doing." He was quiet for a moment. "And how was I really doing?" "Sometimes better than you thought, sometimes worse than you were willing to say." He looked at the floor. The fluorescent light buzzed. "When Mom was sick," he said. "I used it on her," I said. "Yes. And she wasn't scared," I said. "She was exactly who she told you she was. She didn't hide anything from you that she was hiding from herself. She was honest with you." He didn't cry. He looked like he was deciding not to, and then he looked like he didn't need to decide because the feeling was something quieter than tears. "Okay," he said. Priya had been watching this exchange with her precise, evaluating eyes, and I noticed, without the machine, just with whatever remains of the ordinary human instrument for reading people, that she was being careful with us. She was giving us space inside the conversation. She understood that this wasn't just about the technology. After a while she said, "Mr. Hartwell, Daniel, what do you want to do with this?" I looked at the machine. 11 years of my life housed in brushed aluminum sitting in my garage in the dark, like something that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. "I don't know," I said. "It needs to be documented," she said, "properly, the methodology, the calibration process, the validation data, it needs peer review, it needs," she paused, searching for the right words, "it needs to happen in the world, not in a garage." "I know. There are obvious concerns," she said. "Consent, privacy, the applications for coercive use. Government, law enforcement, surveillance, the implications are." "I know," I said again. "I've thought about all of it." "Have you thought about the medical applications, if you can read emotional states with this? Accuracy and range for patients who can't communicate, for people with severe depression, whose affect is masked for," she stopped again, "the number of people this could." She stopped a third time. I understood. The sentence was too large to finish. "Let's start with the documentation," I said. She looked at me very directly. "You're saying yes?" I thought about Margaret in the garden, her resonance pattern running slow and steady and grateful in the October light. I thought about Marcus at the kitchen table, 11 years younger, telling me he was fine, he was handling it, he didn't need anything. I thought about the block party in 2022 and the shame I'd felt afterward, and the 3 weeks I'd spent not going into the garage. I thought about a starling on a garden wall, watching me with one small black eye, doing something that registered as deliberate. "I'm saying yes," I said. Priya exhaled. It was a very controlled exhale, the kind of exhale that is doing the work of a much larger reaction. Marcus looked up at me from across the garage. He looked in that moment very young, the way children look when they catch a glimpse of their parents as people, not just as parents, and the sight is more complicated and more interesting than they expected. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry I broke the door." "You owe me a latch," I said. He almost smiled. Outside, the October night was very still. Inside my garage, the machine sat dark and quiet, waiting for whatever came next, which would be, as far as I could tell, the difficult and necessary and slightly terrifying process of letting the world know that one 63-year-old mechanical engineer who made parts for airplane guidance systems had spent 11 years building something in his garage that could see with scientific precision what people feel in the moments before they've decided who they're going to be about it. I wasn't ready. I also understood finally that ready is a condition you can wait for forever if you're not careful. I got up from my chair, I crossed to the machine. I turned it back on. The display came to life in the darkness, frequencies rising and falling in their quiet, particular rhythms. I glanced at the readouts for Marcus and Priya without saying anything. What I saw made me look away quickly because it was private, because it was theirs, and because some things, even now, even with everything changing, are not mine to read. But I will tell you this, the readouts for my son and the woman he was going to marry were more similar to each other than I had ever seen in two separate people. Same frequency, same periodicity, same underlying tone. I don't have a label for what that specific pattern means. I think I know though. I think I've always known. The latch on the garage door was replaced the following Saturday. Marcus did it himself with a new deadbolt and a keyed lock, which he presented me with 2 copies of the key, one for him, one for Priya. I accepted both without comment. I keep mine on the hook by the kitchen door next to the key. Margaret labeled spare in her handwriting that I have never been able to replace with anything else. When I leave the garage at night, I lock the door and I stand for a moment in the dark backyard, and I look at the garden where the roses still come back every spring without anyone planting them, and then I go inside. The documentation is underway. The machine hums on.